Today we're going to go through the water pump calibration process for the SATURO. And there are two methods that you can use for calibrating the SATURO. The first is a volume-based method where you will measure out a specific volume from the pump. The other is a mass-based method, which is the more accurate approach and the one that I typically recommend, where you measure a specific mass of water that's being pumped out of the device. And we're going to go through that process today. But first off, it's important to note the items that you're going to need for the calibration process. The first thing you're always going to need, of course, is a source of water that's going to go here, and that's going to feed into the water supply line for the SATURO. I recommend at least 1 gallon of water for this process to purge the line and do all the things that you're going to need to do. And then depending on the two methods that you choose to use for the calibration process, you'll either need just a graduated cylinder like this for calibrating the SATURO based on the volume of water that's coming out, or you will need a scale and a container that can be placed on the scale to catch the water for the mass-based method. So the first method we're going to go through is the volume-based method for calibrating the SATURO device. The first thing you're going to need to do is turn the device on. Once your SATURO is turned on, you can go ahead and navigate over to the configuration screen on the SATURO by pressing the menu button once. And at the very top of the configuration screen is the water pump calibration option. So once you're there, you can go ahead and hit enter. And then you need to select which type of calibration you're going to use. And for this one, we're going to select the volume-based calibration. Once you have that set up, then you're going to go ahead and scroll down to the start. So before we start our calibration, we're going to want to make sure we have our water supply feeding water from the reservoir. And we're also going to need to grab our graduated cylinder. This is a 250 milliliter graduated cylinder. This is a little big. You could go down to a 100 milliliter graduated cylinder as well if you wanted. The first thing we're going to do to start the calibration process is actually purge the lines to get any air out of the lines. That way we're only running water through the line during the calibration process. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and go down to the start button. It's going to ask you to check to make sure that you have the water supply line connected and that you have your reservoir ready to feed water into. We can go ahead and hit OK, and that's going to get us started on the purging of the line. So during the calibration, again, it's going to take multiple steps to purge the line. If you don't see that there's clean water with no air bubbles coming through the line, you'll just hit no multiple times until you have a cleanly purged line. Now that we've purged the pump and gotten all the air out of the lines, we're going to go ahead and empty our graduated cylinder. That way we're starting fresh. Now we're going to go ahead and hit yes on the menu to indicate that we've purged the lines, that we're ready to do our calibration. Okay. So you'll see here that now in the screen, we have the option to enter the volume of water that was pumped out of the SATURO. So now that we have that measurement, we're going to go ahead and put in 30 milliliters for the volume of water that was pumped out. And that's going to set our new calibration for the SATURO. Once we're done with the calibration and you hit OK, the SATURO will actually reverse the pump to clear all the water out of the lines and make sure there's no residual water remaining in the device. And we're now done with the calibration based on the volume approach with the SATURO. We're now going to go through the mass-based approach for calibrating the SATURO, which is the one I typically recommend because it's more precise. To do the mass-based calibration for the SATURO, of course, you're going to need a water reservoir again to feed water to the SATURO. You're going to need a scale to measure the water that's being pumped out, ideally a scale that can read to 1/100 of a gram. And then you're going to need a reservoir to catch the water that's being pumped out of the SATURO. And the first thing you're going to want to do is actually go ahead and tear out the weight of the container on your scale. That way you're only measuring the water that's being pumped into the reservoir. Now that we have our scale teared, the first thing we're going to want to do is go to the calibration screen again in the SATURO. And in order to do this, we can go ahead and navigate to this screen by pressing the menu button over to the configuration tab. On the configuration tab, we're going to use the water pump calibration process again. And this time, for our type of calibration, we're going to select a mass calibration instead of the volume. Now that we have that set up, we can go ahead and go to the Start button to get that calibration process started. And again, the first thing it's going to do is try and purge the line of any air. And so we're going to run through that purge process to make sure we clear out the lines of any air, so we're only pumping water during the calibration routine. At the screen, again, it's going to ask you to check to make sure everything's connected and that you have a water source feeding into the device, and you have your line feeding to the reservoir that's going to be capturing the water. It typically takes 2 to 3 routines of the purge to get a nice clean line, so we're going to do that again. Now that we have the line purged and clean, and I feel like that it's free of air and just water being pumped through, I'm going to go ahead and empty the container that's capturing the water. That way we can go ahead and get that calibration process started. I'm going to go ahead and tear the scale out again just to make sure we have a fresh measurement. Now that we have everything ready, I'm going to go ahead and hit yes and get the calibration routine started. You can see that's measuring about 26.39 grams. And so what we can go ahead and do is enter that into the calibration screen as our volume. We know that 1 gram of water about approximates 1 milliliter of water. So we'll go ahead and enter that value in here, but it does come out in terms of grams. Once we have that value entered, we're going to go ahead and hit the Done button, and you're going to see that it's going to go ahead and purge the device in reverse to empty the lines of any water. If you have any questions about this, please reach out to our support team either through the metergroup.com website or through support.environment@metergroup.com.